My colleague Dr. Verrill said about having you in the hot seat for this one.
Very kind.
Some of us, it's a really difficult field for a lot of us because we just don't have the understanding. So it's quite reassuring to have at least some people in this room who have at least some understanding of some of the difficulties there. But one of the things we've been told throughout is that the New Zealand legislation we're not trying to mirror the Australian legislation, but it's very largely drawing from that regulatory regime, which by and large seems to have worked reasonably well. So one of the things I'm unclear on is where our legislation or our proposed legislation differs from what they're doing in Australia and why we put those differences in. I'm assuming it makes it better, but if you could just speak to that.
Sure, look, I'll talk to a few points and then I'll pass that to Emily. You raised one of them in your first reading around SDNs, for example. So Australia does regulate SDN 2. The intention of this bill is not to. And of course, if we look across the spectrum, if we look across the world in this particular area of SDNs, we can see the UK, for example, with the Precision Breeding Act 2023, which was enabled last year, it actually enables cisgenic SDN 3s. So it's right at that extreme, if you like, and it's for animals as well as plants. The EU also looking in short notice to move to SDN 3. We think that's a bit far, albeit cisgenic. It's a bit far for us to go. So we'll sit around with SDN 2s and SDN 1s for small gene editing sequences. So that makes us different in that particular area to Australia. We also have some differences around the management of ethics, for example. There is an ethics provision in the Australian legislation being passed to a ministerial council. My understanding is that hasn't actually ever been done. But we don't include ethics inside, we don't embed that in the bill. Emily, other changes?
So one of the differences, and Australia's just going through a consultation period about changes to their act at the moment, but and some of our advice was from the early consultation on that. So what is different about this proposed bill is to separate out and contained an environment and a medical one. People, there's been quite a big focus of people thinking that there's a big distinction between it. Actually, in my view anyway, it's a transparency thing about where activities are and how they're undertaken, rather than hiding them within a single layer, a single stream. So it actually makes no more difference to the regulation than would be having them in a single stream, but it clarifies them and is a transparency over what can happen under what conditions as allowed by the different risk tiers of the bill. So we think it spells out, it's a complexity, but we think it is a good nuance for transparency in our environment. Probably the other change, Ministers, the MAC as well, that has been included in this bill, and Australia, of course, don't have
Sorry,
MAC.
what you said?
The Maori Advisory
All right, thank you. May I have a supplement? Thank you, that's helpful explaining where the differences are. I do want to go back to the ethics one, and it does concern me. When we spoke with the officials, they assured us that a whole lot of the ethical considerations were considered within existing ledge among animal welfare, and obviously anything we're doing with human beings gets considered by ethics committees and the like. What struck me about that was very much focused on a welfare analysis and the welfare of organisms, of human beings and animals. It concerned me that there wasn't particular attention being paid to other sorts of ethics, so in particular environmental ethics and the sorts of ethics we might have concerns with around ecosystems, and so the ethics of operating with various types of plants. Now, we don't typically worry about welfare concerns with plants, but there are a whole set of other ethical concerns and around ecosystems and the like, and so it concerns me that the focus of ethics was so narrow within this bill that it didn't consider those other sorts of ethical concerns which are well established within environmental ethics and the like. This might just be one tiny space where my own expertise might come to play that I do. There's some Kantian types of ethics that we might not consider in this space, and yet there is no ethics input in the system anywhere that would deal with some of those sorts of issues.
So two things, if I'm wrong, Emily, but I don't think it has no current rules and ethics. So what we do at the moment doesn't embed any legislation in ethical. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't. I'm just stating status quo, and your point is well made. I don't actually know what the answer is around environmental ethics.
So I mean, someone might be able to answer this, but draw attention to the definition of environment in this and what needs to be considered, and if you believe if you think that's fit for purpose in managing some of the issues that you're thinking you're raising.
So let me just reframe that. Simon, is there I mean, we know where to point human ethics towards, we have questions. Where would we point environmental questions?
Yeah, I think Emily's right. I think it's about how we think about the environment and environmental risk, and the way in which the environment is defined in the Act, and the way in which harms to the environmental risks to the environment are considered in the Act, and how that would flow through in the risk management framework that was adopted by the regulator.
Can I supplement possibly, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, question, then I'll go back.
Yeah, thank you. Given the broad...
Okay, how do you find Deborah's questions?
I was quite proud of her as my MP. She lives a couple of kilometres up the road here. Do you want to go first, Claire?
No, you keep going. I've got a few things to say as well.
Well, the whole ethics of it is different in New Zealand from Australia, because if you're going to talk about farming, in Australia, there are farmers there with genetically engineered crops in the environment, whereas we haven't done that here. And if we start doing that, it's going to affect not just organic farms, but ordinary farms. And so that's not very ethical, because you have seed drift from one crop to another. So this is not something that we need here. And we've got the sea around the whole of New Zealand, so we can't get drift from anyone else. So it's not very ethical to put a genetically engineered crop in here and allow it to contaminate somebody else's farm. And also, when you think about it, well, I rabbited on in my little speech about the interconnectedness of life and about how people don't, how am I going to put this? Well, ecosystems, they have an intricate dependency between species, between crops, mycorrhizal fungi from one tree to another. All of this stuff would have to be taken into consideration if they're putting out genetically engineered crops into the environment. So Deborah Russell was quite right to talk about the ethics of it. And what else did I write here? Yes, she said the ethics looked a bit narrow, didn't she? Yeah. Well, I think that would be a little understatement, but it's correct.
What do you think of Jamie Gray's comment that's on the screen there? Australia has a big infertile landmass in the centre which limits drift.
Well, there's Claire, you could probably tell more about this farmer in Western Australia whose crop got contaminated.
I'd just like to go back to some of Shane Retty's comments, if that's okay with you, Sam and Lisa. And I will get into Steve Marsh in a minute. Firstly, he said that the Hasno Bill was 1994. It was actually 1996. He then goes on to say that how wonderful it is that New Zealand's only doing SDN2s, where Australia has it as SDN1 and England has it as SDN3. Now, these are basically the types of genetic engineering and what can be removed within the genome. So an SDN1 just tweaks a little bit. SDN2 tends to take out one and can put in a synthetic template so that it makes it what they want. And SDN3 actually cuts the whole thing and puts a whole new genetic construct in. England has not exempted SDN3s. And in fact, if you want to even release SDN1s, you have to report it. You have to say how it's done. It has to be labeled, and it has to be totally transparent for the public. He's actually a bit lying, because he actually said, or he gave us the impression that England exempted it. Firstly, they don't exempt or put into this category animals. It's only plants. But also to actually deregulate and exempt SDN1, SDN2 genetics, what that means is that they will come into the country unlabeled, untested. We won't even know if we are planting it, because there will be no traceability. If we then find that it goes to the export market and one of these countries goes, hang on, we found it, we will be losing a lot. And there was the Organic Aotearoa New Zealand commissioned the New Zealand Economic Research Institute to look at the possible things, and there was a $10 to $20 billion loss of demand for our agricultural products if we introduce GMOs. So by him actually coming on board and showing, I think, as you said, he may not have read the bill. He is actually being totally ignorant. Firstly, he's got the whole thing wrong. And Hasno, the existing legislation, is actually fit for purpose and protects New Zealand, and it does not ban anybody can apply to them for a that can apply to them to do a field trial. And if the field trial fulfills the safety to the environment as well as the conditions for health and safety, it then goes to a next stage, which is conditional release, which means it's released around the country in small bits. to see how each of the country, and then it has full release. Once it's full released, it is still considered a GMO and it has to be labelled, but it is no longer under the auspices of the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act. And there is no reason that these amendments cannot be put into the Act.
Thanks for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to our Facebook.